Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Soil Talk, the Elevate Ag podcast, where we dig into all things related to the soil. You know, most of the soil health conversations over the last decade has been focused mostly on cropland, and for good reason. We grow a lot of crops in this country, but roughly a quarter of the Earth's land surface is rangeland and pasture and perennials. And a huge portion of that is quietly degrading in production. We don't notice it as much because we're not out there as much as in our cropland, but we have to stop treating these systems like they're low maintenance when they're actually very productive when managed right. So my guest today, Dr. Jerry Hatfield, my friend Jerry. Jerry has spent his career at the USDA studying how the soil and the plants and the atmosphere, how they all work together. Since retiring, he hasn't really retired from working. He's just switched to different areas of work. He's been doing some pretty cool things that a lot of scientists don't do. He gets to get out, get his boots muddy on real ranches in Kansas and Oklahoma to find out what's going on out there and what is moving the needle on range health. So, Jerry, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Keith. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I gave just a little bit of a teaser with your background, but I think you have such an interesting and unique background. Give our audience just a little bit of the background, what you did with the USDA when you retired, and then we can get into what you're doing now.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Keith. And my background is actually, my PhD is in agricultural climatology and meteorology. Let me explain what that really is, and that's that linkage between agricultural systems and the weather or climate, the two different scales that we work in, and all of this, with a minor in statistics, so I can do all sorts of different things and confuse people. But, it's really, that was my PhD. I actually spent 8 years at the University of California at Davis as a biometeorologist, working on all sorts of, not all 400 crops that California grows, but a good share of them, everything from grapes to raspberries to strawberries to cotton and wheat. And then I moved from Davis, California to the high plains of Texas in the plant stress and water conservation unit. So I got much more involved in how plants respond to stress, both water and wind, in the high plains of Texas. And in 1989, I was transferred from Lubbock to Ames, Iowa to become the lab director of the National Lab for Ag and the Environment. It was originally the Soil Tilth Lab, and then we got that changed in 2009 to be the National Lab for Ag and the Environment. And so for 32 years, I directed that laboratory. I actually retired in 2020. Just before the pandemic.
Spent the last 6 years.
That was great timing. We can go into all sorts of stories about that. Over that intervening 6 years, I've been working directly with producers. I've been doing a lot of on-farm trials, as Keith alluded to. Some of these are on range and pasture, others on cropland. So really working in that whole broad spectrum of saying, how do we take the principles like regenerative agriculture and really begin to look at it and say, here's what's happening in the soil. How is that influencing the plant? And then what role does the atmosphere have in changing all this with all this variability in weather that we have from year to year and within growing seasons? How can we build a more robust agricultural system that allows us to optimize our productivity? And so I actually have a concept that we work on called genetics by environment by management that is referred to as G by E by M. Think about it this way: management is what producers do because they're trying to overcome the environment, whether it's the soil variation or the weather that they're experiencing, because they want to optimize their genetics to create as much potential as possible. So when we start using that concept with producers, they begin to see the linkage in ways that they haven't seen before, and they begin to understand the value of some of the management decisions, particularly in the whole soil health arena. If you think about the functions of soil in terms of improving water availability or improving nutrient cycling or carbon dynamics within that soil, they can see, well, if I change this management practice, what does that do in terms of the soil? And then how's it influencing the plant that's out there? And so we see all of those different pieces come into play. And so for the last 6 years, I've got to do everything except administration, which is a pure joy of mine, being able to concentrate in this area. And actually, probably the most rewarding thing is just working with producers all the way across the United States in terms of looking at this and how they can do this and seeing their responses to all the different things that are happening.
I love that, and I can see that you have a lot of joy in getting out and working with the producers. Now, did you grow up in Kansas? Are you from this region originally?
I grew up just south of Wamego, Kansas. The distinction that our farm has, it's the last deposit of glacial rocks in the United States.
Okay.
On one side of the road, it's glacial rocks, and the other side of the road is the limestone. And so you really see that. And there's still some really big rocks deposited by that glacier, even at the very terminus of it. So it'd be amazing to see a time lapse of what happened
Yeah.
during those glaciers in terms of all the different pieces that are out there.
Yeah, that would be. So talk a little bit about, because Green Cover kind of helped get our start with the SARE grant, getting those little moisture sensors that helped us determine the water usage of cover crops. And I believe one of the projects that you're working on right now is part of a SARE grant as well, right?
Yeah, we just received a SARE grant for 26. I'll kind of take you through the history
Yeah.
of this. That in itself sets a lot of stage for why do we keep doing this and what got us started in doing this. And it started back in 2023 because I work with my brother-in-law, and because he and my sister bought actually the family farm that I grew up on. And he's been very interested in saying, how do we chain and manage this system differently in a rotational grazing setting? How do we begin to look at the pasture that we have, the other crops that we grow in terms of mixtures in the spring, mixtures in the summer going into the fall? How do we utilize those? And so we had a little study that we started in 2023 on some ground that we put into prairie hay. And so we applied based materials, a little bit like the range food and boost that we hear about. And what we saw was we had a 700-pound increase in production on that strip of land that we applied this to. And we had a little increase in protein content and everything else. Because Kevin is my brother-in-law, said, if I could improve production by 500 pounds an acre, what would that do for me in terms of stocking rates, my ability to feed cows differently and all of this? So that's what those questions kind of got us started.
Yeah.
Based on that success, you put quotes on success in 23, the combination of Elevate Ag and Quality Liquid Feeds, QLF, all three of us got together along with Kevin and said, could we get other producers interested in conducting trials in this? And so everybody knew somebody else. So we said, let's try this. And we put up 7 different treatments that we just began to look at and say, if we apply materials or do we add some biologicals to them and everything else, what would happen? And so we ran studies all the way from northern Oklahoma through northeastern Kansas. And then Kevin actually has a farm in western Kansas that we could go into as well. So we actually had a L-shaped transect across that. So we have a big precipitation gradient, obviously, between eastern and western Kansas. And then you have a temperature gradient as you go north-south in that transect that we have. So we had these 7 different treatments all laid out. We collected forage samples in all of those. And the increase in production ranged everything from 3 to 1,500 pounds an acre in production, which just blew us away in terms of how much production we were getting. And then we were seeing a slight boost in terms of protein content and things like this. Well, if you take an increase production by even 700 to 800 pounds, you can drastically change your stocking rates and all of this. All those different treatments that we were doing just raised more and more questions in terms of what was going on. So we decided to repeat it again in 2025, but now we enlisted more products that wanted to come along with us. In-soil algae is a participant now. Organosan with their chitosan product is also a partner in all of this. So with all the partners in 25, we kept the same original treatments that we had, and we added 6 more treatments. In 25, we had enough resources that we actually did soil sampling for the Haney test We did PLFA. We've done some infiltration tests. We've done some penetrometer.
And
We've
you do
done
all that kind of the before and after type thing then?
actually we have a control in all of
Oh,
this. So
okay. You
we're
have control.
comparing the control to the treated thing all the time. So we actually have a built-in control. And so we've been looking at all that. I have to give a shout out to Servitech has been doing all of our forage analysis. Regen Labs has been doing all our soil analysis for us and everything. So we've got a pretty extensive database now because we've got 24 data with the 7 treatments. We got 25 data with the 13 treatments that are going on out there. And then that led us to being able to say, could we take down in a farmer rancher grant and put it into the SARE project? So that's where we're at today, is that we'll continue these studies for 2 more years at the original sites that we have. We don't change the treatment locations, we just apply back on that same piece. And so we're trying to look at legacy effects.
Yeah.
So that just kind of gives you a broad overview of what we've been doing. And now we can talk about some of the really interesting pieces that we've seen, both anecdotally as well as data wise, and all of this. It becomes a fascinating piece of this puzzle that we need to really understand much more because, as you said at the beginning, range and pasture are probably the most neglected resource that we have. I see a lot of degraded pastures as I drive around. The things that we're seeing as we improve this is that we're changing that pasture and range very dramatically as we go along. And in that end, I think we're not only improving stand, but we're competing against some of the weeds that often get in terms of invasives. So we're spending a lot more time looking and saying, are there changes in this whole composition of the stand as we're going through this as well?
That's a really interesting thing to think about. Have you seen just the natural recruitment of the seed bank? Have you seen these fields get more diverse without adding anything else other than biology and time?
Yeah, this has been an interesting piece. All of a sudden, I'll take you back to our original piece where we just run that interesting study. The cattle, that's cow calves, when we turned them out in the fall, they went to that spot that was treated before anything else in that field. They sensed that that was better quality hay that was coming back out of that, which was pretty intriguing. You see cattle do this all the time, is that they will go where the high quality grass is in a pasture. That's why they will grub some of it down and leave other parts of it alone, because they do sense quality feed, pretty interestingly from that standpoint. Uh, and we have seen in 24 and then 25, after we applied some of these treatments, we'll begin to see wild alfalfa come back into a range system. And having grown up on that farm, I don't ever remember seeing wild alfalfa in that range area. Also, don't remember seeing that pasture look as good as it did in the fall of 25 than it has in the past. And we're seeing a lot less of the invasive species. Again, that's some of the anecdotal observations. We haven't thrown a lot of rings out there to do a lot of checking on it. It's just visual observation that things are improving in this system.
Well, that's really exciting. And I would imagine you'll probably see this as you move forward, or at least you'll be able to either prove or disprove this. But my guess is that you're going to have a bit of a flywheel type effect as you get more carbon into the system in year 1. Then that gives year 2 a head start. And so you're starting up here. And as long as you continue to build these carbon levels, the energy levels that is coming in from that carbon, as you have more production, you're getting more photosynthesis. The whole system, I would imagine, is just going to be kind of an upward spiral, isn't it? That continues to build on itself and get better.
Oh, yeah. That's, in fact, as we think about this, one of the things that I've worked on from the scientific viewpoint, that the energetics going into the system, it's really about how do we take carbon as an energy source, capture it in plants, put it into the soil, have an impact on the soil biology. And so anytime that we can improve the capacity of that plant to be more efficient in its photosynthetic process, capturing more light longer during the season, bigger, longer green leaf area, and all of this, is that we know we're pumping more energy into that, and we see it reflected back in the biology. In the soil samples that we did in 25, where we could run the Haney test and some of the other soil health metrics, we saw a change in all of the treatments and improved soil health, improved soil dynamics, greater respiration. We saw an increase in total biological biomass in the pasture after the 2 years of the treatment and even after the 1 year of treatment. And so we're looking to see now if we get into that third year, will we see that, as you say, the flywheel effect, where we're actually going to see more and more impact because we've created a better system that is more resilient and we're feeding that biology differently.
Mm.
Because if we want to change soil, it's really about how do we manage the biological system to do the things that we want it to do, release nutrients and everything else. People are always, they look at this skeptically. I'll be honest with you. When you say, well, we're just applying this material to the living plant out there, we're not injecting it into the soil, we're not doing anything magically, we're just basically improving that production efficiency of that plant. And all of a sudden, you have a result going into the soil. One of the fascinating things was we've been running some penetrometer tests. One of the sites in 24, you could hardly get the penetrometer down below 6 inches. In 25, you could push that penetrometer down without stopping.
Mm.
I mean, it changed that dramatically over a year. And so we're looking and saying, we've got a diversity of soils across these sites. And I'll be honest with you, is that you've got these 13 treatments. They're not all consistent among the sites.
Yeah.
One treatment will be a little different than the other in all of this. And I think could be a reflection of what the basic minerals are in that soil, some about the soil profile, everything else is happening within that. And so we're trying to ferret that out as well. We may have to go back and run some controlled studies so that we can begin to look and say, here's some of the mechanisms that are happening in this whole dynamic that's going on.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting because you've got such a variability of sites and environments and products. You're probably going to generate more questions than you will answers, but I think it'll be the right questions. In some places, that's where you need to start.
We got into this not knowing what to expect, being pleasantly surprised about what we did see. But you're right. Every time we do this, it kind of says, well, what's really happening out here? I will tell you that we've been applying these materials not only to the rangeland. Kevin and I have been putting them on the Sudan that we've been growing. We put it on the brome that we've been harvesting. We've seen an increase in protein even in the Sudan, getting a little higher quality feed coming out of that because we are improving the biological efficiency of that plant. There we do have continual soil samples going on, so we know we've been changing organic matter in those soils over time. You can see it in terms of the profile and everything else. So we've dug quite a few trenches in that soil to look at it and say this is happening over time and everything else. So the questions abound. Why do we see those differences among sites? These strips that we use are 300 feet long by 20 feet wide. So they're pretty good sized strips. They're not small strips.
Yeah.
And you can see them in the field and everything else. I'm pulling down satellite data on the different sites to look at that over time to see what happens in some of the growth indices, that not only in terms of what's going on in season, but back to your comment in terms of, do those green up earlier because they have the reserve? Are they changing composition as we can go over time and see those different pieces of the puzzle?
How do you think so let's just say that a producer says, yeah, I believe in this, it's going to work. He commits to it on his whole ranch. He's doing grass-fed beef. How is this type of program going to change the profile and the quality of that animal product versus somebody who's just grazing on more conventional forages?
I think it'll have a tremendous impact. We have seen this because all of this material is going on to our pastures around Wamego. We're weaning off a calf that's probably 50 to 75 pounds heavier. Same period of weaning and everything else. So we are seeing a bigger calf. We want to take it to the next level and begin to look at meat quality coming out of it. Take some of those steers, feed them out. You always have the question, if you keep it on grass fed and harvest that, then get the meat analysis coming out of it. That's the next piece of this puzzle that we do think we're going to have an impact on meat quality. We know we're having the impact on the cows out there, and we know we're having an impact on calves. We think it'll translate into the meat as well, but that is yet to be proven. That may be the next SARE grant that we have to write following out, and maybe we get other groups interested in this study and everything else so that we could even do more. Meat analysis is expensive. We could just cut up a bunch of steaks and do
I was going to
comparisons.
say, if you want to send me a ribeye, I'd be happy to give you a free analysis of it, Jerry.
Yeah, we'd have to, but I have to send you blind. So I'd have to send you one and say, and then I send you another one, and you say, "What's better, A or B?"
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what the
Yeah, you
last
better
one
send me
takes. So
a
you got to
couple
send me.
more.
You got to send me two more.
That's funny.
I see where this is going.
Yes, I have ulterior motives. So,
Anything that we can do to improve that animal efficiency, I think, is going to pay us dividends in all the processes we're going along.
yeah. So for a lot of the farmers and ranchers who will be watching this, they're going to be very practical oriented. So let's talk about some of the practical aspects of this. So first of all, talk about the timing and how you're applying these things. You're just doing strips, but you're doing it on bigger acres on the rest of the farm. So what are you looking at for timing? And then are you just running it out there with the sprayer? What are the application methods?
Yeah, I'll answer the application. We're just running with a sprayer. Where we did it on our bulk pastures, we're just running a 60-foot boom, putting on 2 gallons per acre. It's not a big amount going on. We're going to put it on in Kansas about mid-May, just as that plant really begins to grow. We saw a little piece in some of the initial studies that maybe soil temperature was having an impact, that if we waited till that soil was a little warmer, that plant was really starting to grow. We thought we saw a just bigger impact of the treatment than when we put it on cool soils. So we're looking at that piece of the puzzle as well. We tried to keep the whole cost to $20 an acre application and product cost in terms of trying to maintain something that wouldn't shock a producer, say, well, I can't afford $70 to $100 an acre. I may not get that back.
Yeah.
But $20 an acre, if you can improve production, that's well worth the cost in all of this. And the piece that I think is very interesting in all of this is, what is that legacy impact as we do it from year to year?
Yes.
What's going to be the effect as we go on in terms of all of this? As we improve this rangeland, I think we could apply with a ground rig. You could spray it on with a drone, but you have to get fairly low because we want good contact with that plant and everything. So ground-based rig seems to still be working for us and everything. So
Yeah. I would think as drones get less expensive and more people have them, that will be a pretty viable option. What do you think about, can you use the cattle themselves as an application rig? Can you put any of this product in their water, get that into their rumen? How big of an effect do you think that could be of, using the rumen and the built-in distribution system on the back end of the cow to help spread some of it?
yeah, that's an interesting piece. We have seen, just thinking about some of this, because where we're feeding it, we're putting it on the sedan, or then they're just grazing it in the field, coming back in. The thing that we do see in that system is that those cow pies don't last very long at all. They're really being eaten up by the microbes. You see a lot of mittens out there with earthworms pulling it out. You're also seeing that stalk residue from the sedan and the other pieces that we have in that disappear fairly quickly. So it just tells me that there's an increase in biological
Mhm.
activity. Looking at those fields, I was just there this weekend looking at it. I mean, you could see the dynamics going on at that soil surface with chewing up the lower parts of that residue that was in contact with the soil and everything. So, yeah, it's an intriguing idea. We could use the cows as a distribution mechanism, at least increasing maybe the quality of their manure
Yeah.
going back on and everything. I mean, we don't really analyze manure very well. So that adds another piece of this. And it's a viable question of saying, how do we change the ecosystem from that standpoint in terms of looking at it?
Yeah. Well, that would certainly be an easy way to do it. Just dump a little bit in their water source, and I know there are some people already doing that, and I think it's just really interesting to think about the combination of the two to really get things jump started. How we talked about the year one, the year two, year three, having that flywheel effect. We've seen that all across the country, and one of the starkest places I've seen it is in some almond orchards in California. I was at one where they had a first year cover crop, second year cover crop, and third year cover crop. Because, skeptical farmers, they're going to try out just a little bit the first year, expand it a little bit more the second year, they see what they like, and they go the whole orchard the third year. It was such a stark contrast. That little bit that they had done 3 years ago was incredible. The stuff that
Oh,
had
yeah.
3 years of, and these are just the annual cover crops, these are not perennials. The second year stuff looked really good, and then the first year stuff, it looked okay. It was nothing great, but it's that biological flywheel. You've got to start building up those populations, and you got to start shifting those microbiomes, and we've seen that everywhere. Where cover crops and biology, I look at them very similarly because one supports the other. We just see it get better over time when you stick with it and don't give up.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that we're looking at much more extensively is what are the water dynamics in these prairie systems? Because if we can improve that soil surface underneath that forage so that it's a little bit more porous, it doesn't have a tendency to compact
Yeah.
and everything, and if we can get more water infiltrated so that we're not running any water off and everything's going into the soil, and not only will we stop some of the bank erosion that we see, but we'll also begin to have an impact on plants because they'll have more water stored in that profile to keep everything happening. So,
And then long term, you're going to start changing the local aquifers too.
oh yeah, in fact, we've seen that in one of the pastures. We actually have a spring now where we've been improving the soil and everything. We've got a spring now that is there year round.
I love hearing that. That's so fun.
I put hay up in that pasture for a good many years. I don't ever remember a spring there in a really wet years. And now Kevin is thinking about it that there's enough water coming in that maybe we just build a pond
Yeah. Yeah.
at that point in the landscape to get more water for the cattle this in this whole grazing system that we got. So, I
Love.
mean, those water dynamics I think are occurring in this. They may actually be occurring quicker than we think. But if we can get water into there and know we're going to have an impact on that plant growth.
Yeah. Now, I would imagine that, like any other system, it really still boils down to the producer's management because you can do all these great things. You can grow better, more grass, higher quality grass. But if you still overgraze that and you just turn 100 head out on that patch and leave them there all summer, they're going to go to the best stuff and they're just going to keep hammering into the ground. You're probably going to erase all the benefits that you did with poor management. Would that be correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, management is the key. That's why the G by AM concept is that kind of really forces us to think about the management. I mean, if you really look at this system from a different perspective, it's saying, how do we begin to improve this production system as a whole, not just in that spot, and saying, how do I couple this? I mean, if I could produce you 500 more pounds per acre, first tendency with current cattle prices is, well, I'll just increase stocking rates. Maybe that's not the best thing to do. Is keep the current stocking rate, let that pasture really begin to improve over time and then be able to have a much more legitimate increase in stocking rate as that system
Mhm.
begins to stabilize. Because what we've been looking at and kind of the philosophy that we've been talking about is how can we understand all this and improve the system when cattle prices are high so that when cattle prices become low again, we can still make a profit
Yeah.
in all of this. And so, looking much more long term about these systems, that's why we're interested in the carbon piece of it and the forage quality piece, the stocking rates, all these other things kind of wrapped into a puzzle instead of saying, well, I just now increased productivity by, 800 pounds an acre. Uh, oh, I can put another cow out there.
Yeah.
I can increase my herd size. Well, until you manage, and you're right, Keith, until we manage it in the best way possible, thinking about this year and 5 years down the road, let's ask those different questions about what do we really want out of that system.
Yeah. So, in other words, what I hear you saying is that tools like this, like what you're experimenting with, the biologicals, the stimulants, they're going to be even better for the manager who is really properly grazing, really watching it, really paying attention to rest times and regrowth. Otherwise, you'll just erode a lot of the benefits that you try to gain.
Oh yeah, I mean it's short-term game versus long-term stability.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people that are in the pasture systems and cow calf or even stockers out there do tend to think a little bit more long-term
Hmm.
about how do we begin to manage this system. I think we're trying to give them tools and say, try this, or at least start thinking about ways in which you can manage your system differently. And there's been a lot of successes in terms of improving forage production. And again, it's related back to increasing that carbon capture in the plant, putting it into the soil, and getting that feedback mechanism going.
Yeah. So, tools like virtual fencing, which
Yep.
requires an investment, tools like the biology, which requires an investment. I think for the manager who's willing to put the time and the effort into it, let's just say you got $80 to $100 a cow between the new tools, the technology, the biology, the
Right.
collars, however you want to amortize that out. Do you think that you could make the case that you can get that back by, because with collars, daily moves are super easy.
Oh, yeah.
Moving them 3 times a day. It's just a matter of getting on your phone and drawing
Drawing
that
the
out.
fence.
And now we're going to fully take advantage of the biology that we're putting out there. I would think that you could make that case that you could pay that back. You'd have a return on investment pretty quickly on that. Not to mention the savings in labor by not having to go put up, if you were trying to do daily moves anyway with polyfence.
Yeah, I mean, it's been looking at that saying on the system that we have is if we had collars. In fact, we're going to have a tour on the 8th of July in eastern Kansas on these studies as well as some other things we're doing in cover crops. But how do we look at the collars as being a part of that management practice that gives us a little more flexibility? And so we're still working on the cost benefit, return on investment of doing that. It has an upfront cost, but what's the long term benefit as we go back and forth and all of this? So we're still wrestling with that, to be honest with you, in terms of how do we make it pay, and then looking at it and saying, again, short term, long term, in terms of these impacts as well.
Yeah. And I would think that, again, it should be, as part of the economic analysis, it should be easier to justify the cost of the collars if you compare that with, okay, now we're making this $20 an acre investment, but we're getting 600 to 800 pounds of extra forage, we're getting an extra percent of protein. And now the collars are going to help me utilize that part even more. I would think that that would pay back quicker than doing the collars without doing the biology.
I think it is a whole system. And it gets back to the fact that I think we do see differential response across the pasture. If you've already got good forage there, this really increases it. If you've got poor forage, it's going to take a little bit more tender loving care. Collars allows you to do that. It prevents that overgrazing in parts that are not as responsive. And so you can do all sorts of different things with this. And so, like I said, we're still looking and saying, what can we do, and bringing all these different pieces together.
Yeah. Well, it's exciting because again, as I opened up, there's been a ton of emphasis put on the crop ground, but there's probably 2 acres of perennials and range and pasture ground to every acre of farm ground in the country. And so if we really want to make strides, this would be the place to do it. Have you or any of your participants looked at how this could benefit them in a carbon program? And I want to be right up front. We're not in any carbon programs. I firmly believe the number one value of carbon is getting it in the soil and letting it do its thing. But there are programs out there that can give some supplemental income for doing some of the things you're already doing. How do you see these types of treatments being able to amplify what you might be eligible for?
I think they have a tremendous impact on amplifying that effect. If we start looking at pasture land, and typically carbon programs have just focused on cultivated ground, but you're right. I mean, look, all the expanse of what we have in range and pasture, if we could take and improve soil carbon by 1 percentage point, you'd have such an impact on quality of that forage. You'd have such an impact that would direct benefit to the producer. You'd be talking about gigatons of carbon stored in that whole soil system from that standpoint. And once you get it into that soil system or that rangeland system, it's going to be a lot more permanent because we're not plowing it.
Oh, yeah.
We're not tilling it and causing a lot of losses. So you can rationalize and build a case for that maybe we ought to think about improve rangeland as a carbon sink much more than cultivated ground, although we all know the benefits of carbon into the cultivated ground as well.
Yeah.
And so looking at it from an entirely different perspective than the way we have been, I think will tremendously impact us. If producers want to get into the carbon programs, we can wrestle that out. We can do the things in terms of the MMRV that people would say, well, I don't see that you're changing carbon as much. You change that productivity as much as we're changing. I guarantee you that we're improving soil carbon. And we've seen it. So
Yeah, for sure.
And we're keeping it there as well. So
Yes, and it's going to continue to build like we talked about.
Oh, yeah.
So if someone wants to get started, Jerry, what would be your advice to someone who wants to kind of dip their toe into this? They say, boy, that sounds great. If I want to go whole hog, would you encourage them to do half a pasture? Where would you start?
I would start with strips across the field or pasture and maybe run a couple different strips across that. You don't have to do all the different treatments that we've been doing. Those have been much more for curiosity and research. We can tell you what we think might give you the biggest bang for your particular system and everything else. So get in contact with us. We'll guide you through that process and rope you into being part of the study as well. It's all been a volunteer effort, and everybody that's out there so far, we can just take more volunteers and bring them into this because we're thirsty for information and we're thirsty for feedback on some of these different aspects as well.
Yeah, and yeah, contact any of your Elevate Ag representatives or salespeople. They'll have the information, and we can get you in touch with Jerry. And the more information we can have from different areas, different applications, different timings, the better off it is. And now there's great tools out there now for crunching all this data, and that part has never been easier. Yeah.
Data crunching still takes some skill.
Well, that's why we got the stats guy on the team, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's why they keep me around. They don't let me go in the pasture, just keep me behind the computer.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, thank you for taking the time to join us. This is very exciting work. Thank you for continuing to do this. We look forward to, you'll have at least a couple more really solid years with the Sarah grant, and then that could open it up to lots of other things. But folks, if you're interested, you want to try some of these biologicals or stimulants on any of your rangeland, let us know. We'd be happy to help get you started, whether it's for some strips, bigger blocks. Happy to work with you and help you analyze the data that you get back from that as well. So
Yep.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of Soil Talk. The team at Elevate Ag has decades of experience working with the soil to benefit your farming operation, offering solutions designed to improve soil microbiology, strengthen plant health, and enhance yield. Our team will help you examine the condition of your soil and develop a plan to improve soil health and resiliency while enhancing the biological life of your system. Contact us to work alongside our team to build a program that's customized to the needs and the context of your operation and improve profitability for the future generations on your farm. Visit us at www.elevateag.com or call us at 785 422 7807.